All right, welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into, well, something I think a lot of you struggle with, and I know I do too sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
It's learning English faster and smarter, and I think we all kind of want that magic bullet sometimes.
Yeah, right. Who doesn't?
And maybe you've even put in a ton of work, you've studied all the grammar, you've got those vocabulary lists down, but it still feels like it's just taking forever.
Yeah, you feel like you're not moving forward.
Exactly. So this deep dive is all about how to get to that like lightning speed learning. We're not promising miracles here, but we're going to look at the real science, the actual strategies that can help you improve much more quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And we've been looking at this really cool discussion from the English Leap podcast on Speak English with Class.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're great. And Aaron and Evan, they share some really smart ideas. So we're not just going to repeat what they said, but we're going to take those key ideas and really unpack them, really see how they can work for you in your English journey.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about working more, it's about working smarter. So our mission today is to give you the tools to do that, to understand how your brain actually learns best, and the practical steps you can take, like right now, to speed up your English.
Yeah, and it all boils down to this question. Have you ever seen those other English learners who just seem to be making incredible progress? It's like effortlessly. What are they doing differently? That's what we're going to try to figure out.
Right, like what's their secret? So let's jump in. One of the big ideas from our source material is this idea of meta-learning.
Meta-learning, it sounds fancy, right?
It does, but it's actually super useful.
Oh, for sure.
So basically, it's just understanding how you learn best. It's like learning how to learn. If you can figure out the operating manual for your brain, specifically when it comes to English, then you can unlock that potential.
It's so true. And I think what's really cool about this is it takes the focus off of just the hours you spend studying.
Oh yeah, it's not just about that.
And Aaron and Evan, they were really big on this. It's not about some kind of talent you're born with or just grinding it out for hours and hours.
Right, you can't just force it.
It's about being strategic, thinking about how you're learning.
That's probably resonating with some of you right now because I know I've felt this, where you put in all these hours, you're exhausted from studying, but you're just not seeing the results you want.
Exactly. And meta-learning tells us maybe it's not about pushing harder with the same old methods. Maybe we need to actually look at the methods themselves.
Right, maybe we need to change something up. So to understand why some ways of learning are better than others, we need to think about what actually happens in your brain when you learn something new in English.
Right, what's going on up there? And Aaron used this really cool analogy. He said, imagine you're walking through this super dense forest, like no paths, no trails, nothing.
Oh, so you're just like hacking through it.
Yeah, exactly. You're pushing through branches, tripping over roots, getting completely lost. And it's exhausting.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like your brain when it's trying to deal with a new grammar rule or trying to memorize a bunch of new words.
Oh, so it's like each new piece of information is like another obstacle in that forest.
Exactly. You're trying to force your way through. But here's the thing. The more you practice, the more you use that new word or grammar rule in sentences, you're actually creating a pathway through the forest.
Oh, so like you're actually making it easier to get through that forest the next time.
Exactly. You're clearing a path. And those paths, those are the neural connections we always hear about. You know, how our brain cells connect with each other.
Oh, I see. So every time we learn something new, our brain builds these little pathways between our brain cells.
That's it. But just like a trail in the forest, if you don't use it, if you don't keep walking on it, it gets overgrown, right?
Oh, so you have to keep practicing what you learn, keep using it.
Exactly. If you don't, those connections weaken, and it gets much harder to remember that information later on.
So consistent practice, like regularly using the things you've learned, that's like walking that trail again and again, making it clearer and easier to use each time.
Right on. And here's where it gets really cool, and this is all about your motivation. Every time you make progress, every time you remember a word you learned or you understand something that used to confuse you, your brain gives you this little reward.
A reward? Like what?
It releases this chemical called dopamine. It's like a little yay, you did it signal.
Oh, I like that. So it's not just about feeling good in your head. There's actually something happening in your brain.
Absolutely. And Aaron and Evan, they compared it to playing a video game. Like, remember that awesome feeling when you finally beat that level you were stuck on or you unlock a new achievement?
Oh, yeah, I get that.
That's dopamine. And it makes you want to keep playing, keep learning.
That makes sense. And I know for myself, like even small things like finally getting a joke in English, it gives me a little boost, you know?
Totally. Even little wins like using a new word correctly in a conversation or finally understanding a grammar point that used to trip you up, that triggers that reward system in your brain. But what about when you get stuck? When it feels like you're not moving forward at all?
Oh, yeah, that's the worst. It's like all the motivation just goes away.
Exactly. And it's like you're stuck on that difficult level in the game and you just keep failing. and you're not getting those rewards anymore, so you get discouraged.
Yeah, you just want to quit.
Exactly, and that's the challenge. So as Aaron and Evan said, the key is to keep going, to keep being consistent, and to actually celebrate even those tiny wins. Just being able to use a new phrase in a conversation that can help you keep going when it gets tough.
So it's like we have to change our thinking about how we learn. It's not just about reaching this final destination of being fluent. We need to enjoy the journey, celebrate those little milestones, like leveling up our understanding bit by bit.
Totally. And they had this really helpful way to visualize this whole experience. He said, imagine climbing a mountain. You go through different stages.
Okay, a mountain climb of language learning. I like it. Tell me more.
So the first stage is like starting out. It's that moment when everything is new, everything is challenging, you feel awkward speaking, you can barely understand anything, and it can feel super overwhelming.
Oh, I remember that. It was like every sentence was a huge effort.
Exactly. But you're just starting to build your base camp, right? And then you move to the next stage. It's like gaining momentum. You're starting to improve. The climb doesn't feel as steep anymore. You start to see some real progress.
That's such a good feeling. Like when you realize you can watch a movie and understand whole sentences without even trying, or you can follow a conversation a little more easily.
Exactly. Evan talked about watching a whole episode of a show of English without subtitles. That's a big win. But then you hit the dreaded plateau.
Ugh, the plateau. I think everyone who learns a language has been there.
Imagine you're halfway at that mountain, you're feeling good, and then suddenly the path disappears.
And you're just stuck.
Exactly. You're stuck. You keep practicing, you keep studying the same way, but nothing seems to be working anymore.
Yeah, it makes you feel like giving up.
It could be super demotivating, and Aaron and Evan really highlight that the plateau is make or break for a lot of people. This is where people get discouraged and quit. But it's important for you to remember that it's completely normal. Everyone goes through it, and there are ways to get past it. And then finally, of course, you have the reaching milestones stage. This is like reaching the summit, enjoying the view, looking back at how far you've come.
It's reaching that success. I really like that mountain climbing metaphor because it helps you see that those plateaus, they're not dead ends, they're just part of the climb. So for anyone who's feeling stuck on that plateau right now, what can they actually do to keep going when it feels impossible?
Yeah, good question. So Aaron used this image. Think about walking through the desert. It's hot, you're tired, you're thirsty, you feel like you can't go on. And then you see an oasis in the distance.
An oasis, like a little bit of relief in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. That's your motivation. So how do you create those oases for yourself when you're learning English and you're feeling burnt out?
Yeah, that's what we need.
So the first thing, and this is really important, is to reconnect with your why. Why did you start learning English in the first place? Was it for a better job? To travel the world? To connect with people from different cultures? What was it? Keep that reason, that big picture, front and center in your mind. It'll help you stay motivated. Think about your why for a moment. What is it that drives you?
Yeah, I know for me, when I remember why I'm doing this, it gives me a boost. It reminds me that it's not just about grammar rules and vocab lists. It's about what I'll be able to do with English.
It's about the bigger picture. And the second thing, this is crucial, is to celebrate the small wins. Think of them as those little checkpoints on your desert journey. Did you have a short conversation in English today, even if it wasn't perfect? That's awesome. Did you learn 3 new words and actually use them? Great job. We get so focused on reaching fluency that we forget to appreciate those small steps along the way.
Yeah, it's easy to feel like you haven't accomplished much if you're always comparing yourself to some perfect English speaker. But recognizing those small victories can make a huge difference.
Totally. And here's another thing. If you're feeling stuck, change your scenery. If you're bored or your current methods aren't working, try something new. Join a conversation group online, start watching a different kind of English show, or even learn through music.
Music, that's a good one. I've actually learned a lot of natural phrases and even some slang from listening to English songs. It doesn't even feel like studying sometimes.
Exactly. It breaks things up, it makes it fun, and it engages different parts of your brain. And finally, don't forget to take breaks. Rest is so important. It's like recharging your battery. It gives your brain time to process everything you've been learning.
I have to admit, I feel guilty sometimes when I take a break, like I should always be studying. But it sounds like those breaks are actually really important.
They absolutely are. So to everyone out there who's feeling stuck, remember that desert analogy. Find your oasis. Remember why you started. Celebrate those small wins. Try new things. And take breaks. Every little step counts.
Okay, so we've talked about how our brains learn how to stay motivated. Now let's get practical. Like, what can you actually do to learn English faster and smarter?
Okay, let's get tactical. Aaron and Evan had some really cool ideas here. One of the biggest ones is the 80-20 principle. You might have heard of it. It's also called the Pareto principle. Basically, it says that 80% of your results come from just 20% of your efforts.
So it's like instead of trying to do everything, you just focus on the things that will make the biggest impact.
Exactly. And they gave this example with vocabulary. They said, instead of trying to memorize thousands and thousands of words, just focus on the most common 1,000 or 2,000 words.
Oh, so the words that are used the most in everyday conversation.
Exactly. Those words will cover a huge chunk of what you'll actually encounter in English.
That's such a practical tip. It's kind of like cooking. You don't need to learn every single fancy technique to make a delicious meal. Just focus on the basics, the essentials.
Exactly. Focus on the building blocks. And another thing they talked about was journaling.
Journaling, I thought that was more for personal reflection or something.
It can be, but for language learning, it can be a great way to stay connected to your goals. So write down your goals related to English, like maybe you want to be able to order food in English, or understand your favorite TV shows, or talk to your international colleagues.
So you're writing down what you want to be able to do with English.
Yeah, and when you write those things down, you're reminding yourself of why you're putting in all this effort. It keeps you focused, especially when you're feeling unmotivated.
It's like a reminder of the bigger picture. It's not just about the studying, it's about what you'll be able to do.
Right on. And now let's talk about something that I know everyone struggles with. Forgetting. You learn a new word, you feel good about it, and then poof, it's gone.
Oh, tell me about it. It's so frustrating. Like all that studying was for nothing?
That happens because the information goes into your short-term memory first. Aaron described it like a notepad. You can only write down a few things, and if you don't do anything with them, they get erased to make space for new stuff.
So it's like a temporary holding place for information. So how do you get those important things from the notepad into your long-term memory so you don't forget them?
By practicing and revisiting what you've learned, when you use those new words and grammar rules over and over again, your brain realizes they're important and moves them into long-term storage. Think of it like moving files from your computer desktop into a folder. That way they're saved and you can find them later.
So it's like organizing your brain, making sure the important stuff gets saved properly.
Exactly. So repetition is key. It's not just about mindlessly repeating things. It's about making that information stick. Imagine drawing a line in the sand. The first time it's faint. The waves can wash it away easily. But the more you draw that line, the deeper it gets. That's what repetition does in your brain.
Oh, I get it. So every time you use that new word or grammar rule, you're making that line deeper in your memory.
You got it. Here's another way to think about it. Your brain is like a garden. When you learn something new, it's like planting a seed. But that seed needs water and care to grow. If you don't keep practicing and using what you've learned, it'll just wither away.
I love that analogy. So we need to be good gardeners for our English skills.
Exactly. We need to nurture them and keep them growing. And another crucial thing is feedback.
Feedback, like knowing what you're doing right and what you need to improve.
Exactly. Feedback is like a mirror. It shows you your strengths and also the areas where you need to work harder. Without feedback, you might be making the same mistakes over and over again without realizing it.
Oh yeah, I've definitely had that happen. It can be hard to hear your own mistakes sometimes, so having someone else point them out, even if it's a little uncomfortable, can really help you improve.
Absolutely. Whether it's from a teacher, a language partner, or even an app, that feedback loop is so important. And finally, something that really affects everything else is your mindset.
Mindset, like how you think about yourself as a learner.
Exactly. If you believe that you're just not good at languages, that can actually hold you back. But if you start seeing yourself as a capable learner, someone who can learn English, you'll approach things differently.
It's like you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, you're creating a positive self-image. Aaron talked about running. Even if you're a beginner, if you start telling yourself, I'm a runner, it can actually change how you run, how often you run, and how much progress you make.
So it's like changing your internal script, believing in yourself.
Exactly. And when learning gets tough, and it will get tough, remember that difficulty is actually a good sign. It means you're pushing yourself, you're growing.
So instead of getting discouraged, we should see those challenges as opportunities to get better.
That's the spirit. It's like working out. Your muscles get sore because they're getting stronger. Your brain is the same way. That struggle means you're learning and making progress.
Wow, that's a great way to look at it. We've covered so much in this deep dive, from how our brains learn and the importance of dopamine, to the stages of language learning, to all these practical strategies like the 80-20 principle, journaling, repetition, feedback, and mindset.
It's been a wild ride. And to make all this information even more memorable, Charlotte from the English Leap podcast also shared some great vocabulary with us.
Oh, perfect. Let's go through those key words.
So the first one is cramming. That's when you try to learn a ton of information in a really short amount of time, like right before a test.
Oh yeah, we've all been there, the all-nighter before the exam.
Exactly. But it's not very effective for long-term learning. Charlotte gave the example of Sophie trying to cram for her history test and then forgetting everything the next day.
Not the best strategy. What's next?
Next is trail, like the path in the forest. Charlotte talked about hikers following a trail through the woods, which is a perfect image for how we create neural pathways in our brains by practicing.
That's a great connection back to that analogy.
Then we have abandoned, which means left behind or forgotten. Charlotte used the image of a spooky abandoned house covered in vines to represent what happens to those neural pathways if we don't use them.
Use it or lose it, right?
Exactly. Then there's neuroplasticity, which means your brain's ability to change and adapt. Charlotte talked about James learning to walk again after an accident, showing how powerful our brains are.
That's so inspiring. So no matter what our age or background, our brains can still learn and adapt.
Absolutely. And then there's plateau, that stage where you feel stuck. Charlotte gave the example of Sarah trying a new workout routine after hitting a plateau in her fitness goals.
Showing that plateaus are normal and we can overcome them.
Next is momentum, that feeling of moving forward and making progress. Charlotte talked about Liam writing his novel bit by bit, gaining momentum until he finished it.
That feeling of progress is so motivating.
Absolutely. Then there's repetition, which is just doing something over and over again to make it stick. Charlotte mentioned Anna practicing French pronunciation until she got it right.
Repetition is key. We have to practice those English skills to make them automatic.
Next is dopamine, that reward chemical in your brain. Charlotte mentioned how exercise can boost dopamine, which is a great reminder that learning can be rewarding too.
Those little bursts of dopamine can really keep you going.
And lastly, we have focused identity, which is about how you see yourself. Charlotte gave the example of John choosing to see himself as a curious learner.
So it's all about that positive mindset. These words really do capture all the key ideas from our deep dive.
They really do. And try using those words in your own English conversations this week. It'll help you remember them.
So to recap, learning English faster and smarter is not about some magic trick. It's about understanding how your brain learns, staying motivated, and using the right strategies, like focusing on what matters most, repeating and practicing what you've learned, getting feedback, and most importantly, believing in yourself.
And remember, it's a journey, not a race. Every step you take is a victory, so celebrate those small wins. Stay curious and keep practicing.
Now here's a question for you to think about this week. Which one of these techniques will you start using today to boost your English learning? And what small win can you celebrate right now?
Good luck.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.